Green Flash, a podcast where Ethan Payne, Gresham Cash, and I take you behind the scenes of the making of our first feature-length documentary, The Green Flash. I'm co-director Jodi Cash, here to tell you about the part of this long, crazy ride that changed my life. At the end of 2019, we were nearly finished with production. That's the part of the process in which cameras are actually rolling. There were a few elements of Steve's story that we still wanted, but for the most part, we'd shot all that we needed over those years of packing our van and driving from Atlanta to St. Pete to follow Steve around for as long as we could bear. At this point, we were very close to Steve and very close to his family, and we'd seen a lot change in the years since we stumbled into the story. When we met Steve, he was full of life. He jumped quickly from one thought to the next, he told lots of jokes, he clearly remembered details of his densely lived, colorful life. He was selling books. He had a car. At one point in our very first reporting trip, Steve drove Ethan and I around, pointing out his hot spots around St. Pete, places where he used to drop off loads or stash unthinkable sums of money. We thought for certain we were going to die. He whipped us around this town he'd known his whole life as if rules and guardrails didn't apply to him. But somewhere along the line, Steve began to struggle. We'd known, of course, that his life as a drug smuggler coincided with being a heavy drug user. When he was young and wild, it added speed and intrigue to what he was doing. But when he became a father, it became a big problem. Steve's decades as a middle-aged parent featured extreme highs and lows. He was arrested while he and Jill lived in La Jolla. She took their twin daughters, Gigi and Wendy, to Venezuela and told them Daddy was on a fishing trip. Then he got out. Jill and the girls returned to St. Pete Beach. Jill and Steve got married and had a son named Beau. Then Steve went back to prison again. As his kids grew up, they slowly realized their dad was different than most. Here's how Wendy remembers it.
I can specifically remember 13 years old, and it wasn't even found out. We went to Venezuela for a trip we were 13. Over the summer, we went for 2 months, came back, and that's when Dad called and we talked to him on the phone because we're like, oh, where's Dad? Why isn't he here? And that's when he kind of said, oh, I'm not going to be around. And we found out hey, your dad went to jail. And I remember specifically he was like, oh, it was just one last thing I was doing. It was for you guys, for your future, for college tuition or something. I remember that specifically. And I kind of well, what did you do? But even then, we were not, my mom made sure to kind of, I guess, protect us, but we knew something had happened and Dad was going to go because he made whatever choice, but that was it.
In the years when he was free and clean enough, he taught his kids to love life by the ocean, to fish, crab, surf, and dive. In one really heartfelt interview, while Steve was in a particularly tenuous state, Gigi recalled the best things she got from her dad.
Water, being around water, and the beach. That would be the one thing I definitely got from my father. And that I'm 100% grateful for every day of my life because it's our passion and we love it. We were hardcore. We were 9, walking 7 blocks, carrying a 100-pound wet, waterlogged Rusty that my dad had, that he kept on the side of the house. The thing weighed more than my sister and I did. We were sticks when we were 9 years old. But we'd carry, if there was swell, I remember we used to dial in at the time 367-7873, which is the surf line, and you'd call it. And the guy would put a report, in the morning, and you'd be he's oh, so it looks, he worked at Suncoast Surf Shop, right across the beach. And, his report was just looking out the window and taking a guess, but you knew, okay, did he say 2 foot? Okay, we're going, let's go. We have that love for the water and love for the ocean, and once it's in you, it's it can never leave you. We could never live anywhere not around water, So we just had it, and it was burning desire to try to surf anything we could.
This love of the water, which drove Steve's life and shaped his children, inspired one of the first musical themes Gresham wrote for The Green Flash, the ocean. I still remember him sitting down at our piano in Atlanta and filling our house with the sound of it. Steve's kids took the best parts of him and built their own lives and families in St. Pete Beach. They were impacted, of course, by what he exposed them to, but Jill and her parents provided a solid foundation for them in spite of it. After Steve's 3rd imprisonment, when his daughters were in high school, he and Jill divorced, but they remained on gracious terms, always treating one another like family. When we met Steve, They all attended church together on Sunday mornings. He went to his grandkids' baseball games, birthday parties, and surf competitions. He was always an offbeat grandpa, to be sure, but he was there and he was beloved.
I just learned off his mistakes that he's done before, so it was always in the back of my mind. Like, you can get in trouble for anything you do that's major, you know, and there's always a consequence to an action. So I'm glad he put that in my head, because I wasn't going down a good path either. But once I grew up and I was like, damn, look how my dad ended up. But I also looked at that in the right way. He did his thing, you know, he made his mistakes, but after all that, he came back to a family man, and he's still here. He still plays with his nieces and nephews and grandkids and me, you know, like, he's always around. That's all he wants now is just family. And you can tell he sticks to it, you know.
But by 2019, those years of hard living were catching up to him.
There was a lot of nasty times, too. I mean, ODing on drugs and just on, and bringing millions to the cartel down in the jungles, can't speak a word. Guys wanting to put tons of cocaine on, putting a machine gun to your head. If you don't do it, you ain't gonna sell any more pot. With me, Dad, you know, just threats and in storms and big waves and unloading and just one thing after another. I mean, hell, I've had 12 implants, double knees, shoulders, hips, and all that. Good Lord's still there with me.
Smuggling, like fishing, diving, and surfing, and everything Steve did, was extraordinarily physical, and his years of hard drug use had made his bones brittle. After the 12 implants you just heard him describe, he had another hip replaced in 2019. His recovery moved slowly. We found the man we'd once had trouble keeping up with in a rehab bed, wishing he could open the windows and smell the air after an afternoon thunderstorm. Everyone close to Steve was getting increasingly worried and frustrated. Major surgery is dangerous for someone with a long history of drug addiction, and although the pain was surely incredible, some speculated that his desire for opiates was even stronger. And so a vicious cycle began. It looked like our last few shoots would be set in hospital rooms and rehab centers, not exactly the heroic ending we'd had in mind. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about our partners, Last Prisoner Project. The Last Prisoner Project is a nonprofit organization dedicated to cannabis-related criminal justice reform. As the United States moves away from the criminalization of cannabis, giving rise to a major new industry, there remains the fundamental injustice inflicted upon those who have suffered under America's unjust policy of cannabis prohibition. Through intervention, advocacy, and awareness campaigns, the Last Prisoner Project works to redress the past and continuing harms of these inhumane and ineffective laws and policies. We're using our film, The Green Flash, and this podcast to help the Last Prisoner Project raise money and awareness. Visit www.lastprisonerproject.org or text FREEDOM to 24365 to donate and learn more. Now, back to the episode. As Steve's life was changing before our eyes, so were ours. With post-production on the horizon, Gresham and I hatched a crazy plan. We'd spend the next year or so floating around Europe, enjoying a different pace of life, and we'd start digging into our footage remotely. Before leaving, we traveled to St. Pete for what we thought might be our final shoot. Steve was in a rehab facility and doing badly. We brought him a book for identifying birds in Florida, told him how much we loved him, and said goodbye for a while. A few short weeks later, COVID hit. Gresham and I found ourselves in the midst of the Spanish lockdown in Barcelona, unable to leave our apartment except for one by one for groceries. But we made friends with locals balcony to balcony, our language skills slowly improved, and before we knew it, we felt like we were living in a different movie than the one we'd come to make. Still, Steve called me frequently to make sure we were on task.
Just checking in on Jodi in disguise. She's got the bluest eyes. The Jodi in disguise. She's got the bluest eyes. She'll make you want to cry, cry, cry. What's up, Joe? How's the marriage couple doing? Give me a shout. I haven't heard from you in a coon's age. It's Green Flash. Let me know how you guys are doing. How many babies you got now? Yeah, give me a shot. Mr. Gresham, where in the Sam hell are you? Give me a shout, big and tall. All right, look. With the picture of the boll weevil. He's got his white beard and hanging in there.
But Steve didn't have to worry. Life would draw us back his way. We were in Spain without visas, and although we'd been allowed to stay for 8 months due to the shelter-in-place decrees, by September of 2020, we had to go home. With our European dreams on hold, we figured we might as well go back to St. Pete. We'd become so attached to it over the years. And there we could really dig into post-production with the inspiration of its actual setting. And at that point, Ethan was uprooted too. So in 2020, you had moved from Atlanta to Athens to live with one of your best friends and drummer, John Swint. And then we were like, okay, these are still COVID times, so we've got to get together and we've got to start working, but how are we going to do that? And so we all did the quarantine test thing, whatever, and then we combined forces in a house lovingly known as Parrot Park. And so I had started reaching out to people via Airbnb in this desperate time for rental houses in tourist towns and being like, look, we're a little film crew. We don't have any budget. If you could just cut us a deal, we've got to work on this project about these people in St. Pete. Please be a part of our story and process. And a bunch of people were like, you need to get the hell out of here with that. But then a woman named Dee got back to me and is the coolest person on earth. She and her husband, Matt, they are the coolest people on earth. And they're like, look, we're from Brooklyn. We get the artist thing. We'd love to help you guys out, give you a reasonable rate, And so then the three of us met up and moved into this little 2-bedroom house in Gulfport, Florida, one of the little neighboring tiny towns next to, it's basically in between St. Pete Beach and St. Petersburg. And I guess we were all there for about 2 months. And that's when we did kind of our final shoot and kind of started digging into post-production. And it was such a funny and fun and completely bizarre little time. What did you think moving in for a little while with me and Gresham in Gulfport, Florida was going to be like?
Oh, it was so fun. I mean, we'd spent all that time together making the film. I was like, oh, it's fun. It was, I was so excited. I was so pumped to be, it's like a little artist retreat, where we had a purpose, we had a job that we were trying to finish, and also we were trying to go to the beach.
We would go
to Hawkers
sunset.
and trophy fish.
And go to Hawkers and trophy fish. We had the experiment of getting our own stone crab claws once, and then realized we did not know how to get them out of the shells at home. Learned that a cast iron pan in a pinch will work, creates a mess. We would go for everybody had their own little beach town routines, going up and going for walks or runs at different times of the day and just living the life.
It was
so
the perfect
nice.
life. We would be just wake up and maybe do a little work. Oh, maybe it's time for lunch. Oh, okay. Maybe, at 4 p.m., I think we're done. I'm going to run. I'm going to go for a jog down to the beach and get in the water at sunset. And Jodi and Gresham are just going to drive down and join me. And then I guess we'll get dinner.
If Gresham hadn't fished and caught us dinner.
That's true.
Which was a wonderful perk of living there also.
I can't say how productive I felt because I didn't feel very productive in the edit. What did we get done in those 2 months besides having a great birthday for me? We made Gresham a music video.
You went blonde in that time.
Oh, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, you became a different person.
I became the Florida man that
you always were.
I always was, and
You were ready to embrace your truth.
it was my birthday. What was I turning 35? Yeah, 35.
Because the needle also kept moving where we were like, we've got to have the film done by the time Ethan's 35.
Right.
Then we did miss that
Exactly. And we missed that mark. But it was my birthday, and I was spending some time in Florida with my best friends and working on something. And I was like, you know what? It's the pandemic. Let's just do this thing. I actually don't even remember where it got into my head to bleach my hair, but I bleached my hair.
It was time.
It was time.
That was a great success. We used our time wisely. I mean, in that time, in fairness, I do think we reviewed most of the footage, and we were starting to piece together what the story was. Steve lived so many lives, and by 2020, we'd conducted dozens of interviews and gathered hours of archival materials to paint a picture of this complex, elusive person we were profiling. When we got together in the context of that strange year, it was hard to know how to make sense of it all. But as we watched hours upon hours of our footage and sorted index cards with major themes and moments from Steve's life, certain scenes began to jump out. Do you know what stands out to me as a moment, though, when we started, kind of as we were wrapping up shoots in 2020 and starting to really think about post-production and editing, and we were like, what is this film going to be? What is this film going to be about? How's it going to start? Where do we begin? And that scene of the barber shop just kind of jumped out in editing, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny if this whole film began with these two men being like, no, I don't remember Steve getting in any trouble.
No, I don't remember Steve getting in any trouble.
Yeah, I don't remember.
No, see, it was all good. Yeah, nobody locked their door, everybody was friendly.
No. That was the old days when everybody knew everybody, nobody locked their doors and passed the grill.
Everybody was happy,
Yeah,
there was no trouble,
no.
very little crime, and
There was no crime.
Everybody, it was just like one big family out there on Paso Grill, and still, Steve knew everybody.
And it's just then it started to become clear, like you're saying, that we had to make this about our experience of getting into this community and the whole community kind of telling us their insight to Steve and their experience knowing him. And just that it was funny and light and so bizarre and human.
One thing that I relate for all the film nerds, behind the scenes nerds out there, one thing that I love about that scene in the barbershop is you think it's none of those dudes were mic'd. None of them had lavaliers. We brought my huge C-stand in there and had a boom pole on it. And we were shooting into mirrors. And we saw the backs of their heads. Mm-hmm. And we never saw the boom in the stand.
Great job, Ethan.
Well, Gresham set it up.
Great
and
job,
we just were just
Gresham.
put it there, and they sound great.
It's amazing.
The boom caught both of them, Hammer and Pete. And I just, every time I see it, it makes me proud that we got away with it.
Well, and that's all your years training on those zombie shows. It paid off. Then you trained Gresham and he kept the boom out of the shot. It sounds great.
For all my years as a boom operator, I still have the curse of anytime I watch anything, I am thinking about how they recorded the sound.
And now you've spread that to us, and we've begun.
And now
to
you
think
have
about
that paranoia.
Paranoia
and curiosity.
Movies have lost their joy for me too.
Sound, it's tough.
Thank you.
The most beautiful, intimate moment in your favorite movie, just picture 5 other bros in the room with them.
Just hovering over them,
breathing with a boom mic and a assistant camera pulling focus.
God.
You're never alone.
You're never alone. That's so comforting.
Ethan here, just taking a quick second to let you all know about some friends of ours, Look Alive Coffee. Look Alive is a small batch coffee roaster out of St. Pete, Florida. They make fresh, seasonal coffees to fuel whatever you're working on. Whether it's a painting, a playlist, your favorite book, or a podcast based on a film, they're here to keep you energized and inspired. You can find them at lookalivecoffee.com. Now back to the show.
For all our techniques and improvisations and triumphs and mishaps in production, what we'd collected was a communal memory of a man. And we started to think that maybe that was the experience we'd try to represent in a film. Having a whole town tell you about a person, while that person describes his life in relation to the town. Steve was notorious, of course, but he was also beloved. And we were increasingly in awe of how the St. Pete Beach community, and especially Steve's own family, dealt with its black sheep. That October, my dad came through town. In retrospect, I think I was drawn to Steve's story because of the ways he reminded me of my dad. And in turn, I think a lifetime with my dad prepared me to deal with Steve's eccentricities. My dad lived across the state in St. Augustine, where he was a cherished local musician, widely loved in spite of his own struggles. I was so happy to see him. We had one of the sweetest visits we'd had in a decade, showing him why we'd fallen in love with this story and this place. It wasn't hard for him to understand. We took him to watch the sunset from Treasure Island, and then we feasted on peel and eat shrimp at the wharf, before coming back to Parrot Park to play music together. For the first time, it was clear how much my life looked like his. We were taking risks to make something because we thought it was important. And as hopeful as we were that it would offer meaning to someone who someday saw it, that was beside the point. It was about living a life dedicated to drawing people together and amplifying beauty, just what my dad had done over a lifetime of playing music for people. After Gresham, Ethan, and I attended my dad's gig in Tampa, my dad and I exchanged our love and how proud we were of each other in the parking lot. We helped him pack his gear into his Kia Soul, and he gave me a huge hug goodbye. And then I never saw him again. Making a documentary is a funny study in acceptance. I think it's a lesson each of us learned in our own ways. It's a metaphor for life. You set out with a plan and you find yourself constantly adjusting to the actual reality you're handed. We thought we'd make a film about a drug bust and found ourselves capturing the story of a dad. We started examining Steve Lamb as a father, and I lost my own. It became clearer to me as the word shifted from concept to lived experience how powerful loss was in the stories we were being told. Steve had lost so many people close to him. That made it easy to understand why he was so determined to get those still living on film. We got word one by one as people Steve introduced us to passed away. Joe Nuzzo, Troy Polk, Josephine Valenti, Catherine Curran, Charlie Fuss. I could suddenly see the ways Steve himself was trying to direct the film, to capture and eternalize the people and the place that made his life so special. And the sense of how precious our time with Steve was grew stronger. When my dad died, Steve sent me a very Steve text to say he was thinking of me. His signature lamb emoji, prayer emoji, for you, ram emoji. I cried tears of gratitude. In that last year of shooting, we found Steve in various fragile states. While it was happening, I couldn't understand why Ethan bothered shooting footage of him in rehab centers and hospitals, but it proved to be some of the most thoughtful and reflective footage we have of Steve, although even Ethan wasn't sure what to do with it. Later, in 2021, when our lives resumed some semblance of normalcy and we returned to the edit in earnest, we decided to call Jake G., our original DP, back into the fold. We needed him to create an assembly cut and to help us see things that we'd become blind to after all those years of staring. And thank God we did. Jake, with his poetic sensibility and incredible eye, spotted footage that I, at least, had long dismissed. And he used it to open and close our story, two tasks that seemed nearly impossible.
Those shoots in the various either hospital room or inpatient rehab facilities for his hip. We say rehab, and it's confusing because he was never in when we knew him. He was never in rehab for addiction. It was always rehab for broken bones or hips, shoulders, things like that. Usually hips. But being there, essentially sneaking cameras in, was so surreal because one, it was okay. Where does this footage fit? Why? Which then, of course, Jake gave us the answer by putting it at the beginning and the end. We're there with him in the hospital at the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, which was so beautiful. But I remember, being there and not knowing, again, like we've said before, not knowing what we're getting. We were done with trying to control things, and we were broken. No. We were so broken, dare I say, that it was, okay, Steve, take the wheel because you're going to anyway, kind of thing.
Well, and that must have occurred to you much sooner than it did to me, because I remember watching you shoot in those hospital rooms and rehab facilities and being like, you are just like wearing yourself out for no reason. I cannot believe you're still holding that heavy ass camera up in here. Like, why?
I got to do something
just like rambling and meandering. And he was.
I got to do something to deserve my hawkers at the end of the day.
Exactly. You were working hard for your meal.
I got to hit record at least once every day.
Thank God. But then the things that we got from him in those moments turned out to be so poignant. And we just couldn't see that until we were digging into all of it. In the hospital shoots, and like one of my favorite moments in particular, we've got Steve. You filmed Steve looking through this photo album that includes all of his friends who he smuggled with and his family, his mom, his sister.
That's my brother-in-law right there with my mom. Badass picture. Let me see that. That's my mother. She's the one who raised us. Well, my sister and Pat, when they got married in '73. And that's where I buried that money that disappeared. Jeffrey, we still have to have a talk, my brother, from a different mother. Okay, look at the moms. The moms who bred the smugglers. Smoking cigarettes.
And we just finally caught Steve being sincere and reflective. I mean, he was still very playful and silly and in some moments really impossible. But he was actually just kind of like so worn out that he couldn't put up any of his defenses and would just talk a little more thoughtfully about what it was like to look back on his life. That footage, like all of our time with Steve, was such a gift. I started producing scripts, which Jake would cut. And my heart, still raw with the sting of loss, started to heal as we assembled the picture of a family who loved its oddest member in spite of his idiosyncrasies, and perhaps only more for the hard things they'd lived through together. While Steve remained the undeniable star of our film, the real heroes were his family members. I just think the Lamb family in general, and like particularly things that Jill said and that their whole family modeled about unconditional love and how to be a family member, was so radical for me and something that I'm so thankful for. And I have a wonderful family who I've always loved and felt so lucky to have. But I think they modeled the kind of gratitude that I really needed to see and a kind of forgiveness that I really needed to see. And there are a lot of parallels for me between Steve, particularly Steve as a father, and my dad. And it was so important for me to see Steve's family just really embrace him and like to totally recognize the things about him that were difficult and that were sometimes unacceptable and lines that had to be drawn. But they also loved and cherished him, and, you know, way beyond tolerated, they celebrated the things about him that they loved and included him in every way that they could. And I think I kind of needed that for my heart to soften about things in my family, you know? And for me to be able to look at my dad differently than I had for a while.
Would you say that, the biggest thing is just the lack of judgment they had?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they modeled a kind of non-judgment that I'd never witnessed in a family before. And that is definitely how I would like to raise kids, and how I, hope to be treated as a parent and grandparent, where even though I'm human and will certainly do things wrong, it doesn't mean you're outcast from the family. It doesn't mean you're not loved. And I think that's so powerful. And one of the things that I really hope comes through to people is being able to watch this and look at the black sheeps in your family and say, you know what, they're just doing their best. And I'm going to give them that a little differently.
After a close friend or family member sees the film, I always ask them, so who was your favorite character and why was it Jill?
She is the real hero. It's like there's so much that I gleaned from Steve and, from Charlie, from all the people we met. There's so much I admire, but I do think Jill is just like one of my absolute personal heroes. I think she's the coolest person on earth. I think she's such an amazing person, such an amazing woman, mother, friend, sister, daughter. Jill rules. In the wake of my dad's death, I don't know what I would have done without this film and the people I was making it with. In it, I found answers to questions I didn't even know I was looking for. My life slowed down while I was observing someone else's, and I learned from him and the people close to him how to truly appreciate it. It's as simple as gathering with the people you love at the end of the day and watching the sun dip beneath the ocean. And when you're lucky, there's a little green flash, gone just as soon as you see it. Looking for the Green Flash is a podcast written and produced by
Ethan Payne,
Gresham Cash,
and Jodi Cash. It features an original score and sound design by Gresham Cash. We made this podcast to support the premiere of our first feature-length film, The Green Flash. This August, we're taking The Green Flash on tour throughout Florida and Georgia. We'll host screenings and special events at independent theaters from St. Pete Beach to Key West to St. Augustine before we bring it home to Athens and Atlanta. For more updates, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Green Flash Documentary, and sign up for our newsletter at www.thegreenflashdocumentary.com. Thank you so much for listening to Looking for the Green Flash. We'll be back with another episode next Monday. We'll see you in the movies.